Bow down, I am the emperor of dreams. I crown me with the million-coloured sun of secret worlds incredible, and take their trailing skies for vestment when I soar. Not just any fantasy, horror and science fiction author could impress H.P. Lovecraft into calling him perhaps unexcelled by any other writer, dead or living, or compel Fritz Lieber to employ the worthy term sui generis. Clark Ashton Smith simply wrote like no one else. This new collection of his very best tales and poems allows readers to encounter Smith's visionary brand of fantastical, phantasmagorical worlds, each one filled with invention, terror, and a superlative sense of metaphysical wonder. In the pen of Clark Ashton Smith, not a single sentence was safe. This is probably one of my favourite books. It might be my favourite book, although I generally prefer novels and coherent narratives, finished stories, and this is a collection of various things. It's short stories, prose poems and verse. I usually prefer just regular stories, novels and novellas, but the sheer prose quality of this book and the amount of imagery and different conceptions, it's so original and so impressive and so dense with language. And it's a vague term, saying it's a vague phrase saying dense with language, but this book feels so, I mean, it's just addictive to read. There's so much imagery and fantastical. It feels like it's like blooms of creation and different imagery that unfolds. It almost feels like one of his creatures, like Ubu Safla, or the mother of toads or something like that. It's just, the book, as I say, is a collection of various things published throughout Cass's career, covering just an incredible amount of different imagery and stories and conceptions. However, Clark Ashton Smith was not only was he a writer, he was also a painter and a sculptor as well. And interestingly, I found that I believe he once said to his editor at Weird Tales, it might not have been Weird Tales, but he said to an editor that he found writing prose more challenging than writing poetry. So he was a poet first of all. I believe he was taken under the tutelage of people like George Sterling before he moved to sort of Weird Tales and started working on his short stories. I also believe it wasn't just that he found it difficult. I think he also said something to the effect of he was forced to write prose because that's the only thing that sold, whereas his heart was more in verse and poetry. However, I think that he sort of undersells himself, because whilst the poetry is incredible, and he also, I should say, he really is up there with the big poets, really, because I believe he was even translating, at a young age, he was translating Baudelaire's like The Flowers of Evil, which actually I think that's in there, The Flowers of Evil, in an English translation from the French. But anyway, the prose is just as good as the poetry to me. So he was taken under the tutelage of people like George Sterling, and I believe he eventually met. So I believe Cass was first introduced to Lovecraft in the 1920s. I believe he wrote the long poem The Hashish Eater, which is an incredible, very very long poem about one's journey through well, actually, it's almost indescribable. I'll leave it at that. It's a sort of spiritual journey. But I get away from myself. Clark Ashton Smith met Lovecraft in 1920 and began corresponding with him after he wrote the poem The Hashish Eater. He first read a fan letter from Lovecraft, which sort of started the friendship between those two. And actually, this book sort of chronicles the friendship. Actually, St. Joshi does a lot in Weird Tales. You might be familiar with him, and he really put in a lot of effort with all the notes for every story and for every poem. Even goes so far as to clarify certain archaic words. There's a lot of cross-referencing and really impressive notes. Yes, and we see Clark Ashton Smith write about his struggles with weird tales and his correspondence between people like Robert E. Howard, who did the Conan stories, and also and with Lovecraft as well, obviously. And there's even a story in here, I believe it's just to H.P. Lovecraft, which is sort of a eulogy for Lovecraft when he died. He died before Clark Ashton Smith, I believe. And he wrote a story as an homage to Lovecraft. So he's one of the big three, really: Lovecraft, Robert E. Howard, and Cass. But I just want to read something that Cass once said about his own writing. My own conscious ideal has been to delude the reader into accepting an impossibility, or a series of impossibilities, by means of a sort of verbal black magic, in the achievement of which I make use of prose rhythm, metaphor, simile, tone, colour, counterpoint, and other stylistic resources, like a sort of incantation. So he's definitely a reader that you, a writer that you read for the prose quality and the imagery. The characters are quite. I wouldn't say they're standout. A lot of them are magicians and wizards and investigators in the same sort of sense as Lovecraft. Not quite as Lovecraftian though. It's going on a tangent here, but I feel like this book is a lot more. It's closer to things like Dunsany's In a Land of Time and Other Fantasy Tales. It combines fantasy such as wizards and all the usual sort of things: ghosts, spirits, wizards, magicians, investigators, dark vaults and chambers, but also with almost a sort of meta aspect as well, if you understand what I mean by that. There's an incredible short story called The City of the Singing Flame, which almost makes reference to portals and other worlds, which I'm quite interested in actually. Before I get onto the excerpts, just like to discuss the cons a little bit. Aside from the fact that I didn't respond to some of the stories as strongly as I'd like to have responded, I think it can be a little bit too dense. It can be a little bit almost overwhelming. A lot of people say that Lovecraft is purple, and it almost sounds like I was going to say that Cass is purple, but he has the background, the verse background, and the literary background that I don't believe that Lovecraft really had. So that he isn't purple. I don't think he's purple. I just think he is so dense and refined, and he puts a lot of sort of. I think it's almost the grandness of it, the grandeur of his writing that is almost overwhelming. And obviously, just generally, there are a lot of archaic words and obscure words. He dwells a lot on colour, and I guess the vision is so unique. Obviously, I mean, it's just we're talking about other worlds, and we're talking about strange conceptions, we're talking about weird tales, I suppose. There was an apt 2-word description there, an apt title that all I needed to say was we're talking about weird tales. So yes, I've been in awe of this book since I've read it, really. But I just think it could have been toned down a little bit. I believe some of the reviews on Amazon, for example, they say as well that it's a little bit too much. A lot of the stories are based on the mythologies of Cass and Lovecraft, which is not a bad thing in and of itself, but I felt like some of the stories in here that I read sort of left you feeling like you just stepped into a story halfway through. For example, the Tale of Satampra Zyros is one of them. It's the very first one, actually. I believe it's based in the sort of Hyperborean commemorium, mythos, where it feels a little bit too much. For example, just read the start of this, or just read a little bit to give you an idea. I, Satampra Zyros of Uzuldarum, shall write with my left hand, since I have no longer any other, the tale of everything that befell Tiruv Umpalios, and myself in the shrine of the god Sethogoa, which lies neglected by the worship of man in the jungle-taken suburbs of Commorium, that long desert capital of the Hyperborean rulers. So you can see what I mean by that, I think. And then it goes on to give more more names. It's not just limited to that. So it does feel like you've stepped into a story that's already happened, because it is, some of the stories link, and references are made to things that Lovecraft conceived, for example. And there are things like Lemuria, Commemorium, or Commorium, Hyperborea, Zothique, etc., etc. But that's not too bad, and that's not really too bad. It's not an overwhelming con, really. So I'd like to read some excerpts from Clark Ashton Smith, The Dark Eidolon and Other Fantasies. This one is probably one of my favourite short stories. This is The Last Incantation. Meleagris the magician sat in the topmost room of his tower that was builded on a conical hill above the heart of Sutheron, capital of Poseidonus. Out of a dark stone mined from deep in the earth, perdurable and hard as the fabled adamant, this tower loomed above all others and flung its shadow far on the roofs and domes of the city, even as the sinister powers of Meleagris had thrown its darkness on the minds of men. Now Meleagris was old, and all the baleful might of his enchantments, all the dreadful or curious demons under his control, all the fear that he had wrought in the hearts of kings and prelates were no longer enough to assuage the black ennui of his days. In his chair that was fashioned from the ivory of mastodons, inset with terrible cryptic runes of red tourmalines and azure crystals, he stared moodily from the one lozenge-shaped window filled with glass. His white eyebrows were contracted to a single line on the umber parchment of his face, and beneath them his eyes were cold and green as the ice of ancient flows. His beard, half white, half black with glaucous gleams, fell nearly to his knees and hid many of the writhing, serpentine characters inscribed in woven silver athwart the bosom of his violet robe. Another one. This is just a quick excerpt from the story, the title story, The Dark Eidolon, about a dark necromancer who gets his revenge on, or shows his power on an earthly king, summoning vast powers from the outer cosmos. Then, toward midnight, the necromancer rose and went upward by many spiral stairs to a high dome of his house, in which there was a single small round window that looked forth on the constellations. The window was set in the top of the dome, but Namira had contrived by means of his magic that one entering by the last spiral of the stairs would suddenly seem to descend rather than climb, and, reaching the final step, would peer downward through the window, while stars passed under him in a giddying gulf. There, kneeling, Namira touched a secret spring in the marble, and the circular pane slid back without a sound. Then, lying prone on the curved interior of the dome, with his face over the abyss and his long beard trailing stiffly into space, he whispered a pre-human rune, and held speech with certain entities who belonged neither to hell nor the mundane elements, and were more fearsome to invoke than the infernal genii, or the devils of air, earth, water and flame. With them he made his compact, defying Poseidon's will, while the air curdled about him with their voices, and rime gathered palely on his sable beard from the image of bronze and iron, the prose poem by Clark Ashton Smith. In the temple of the city of Morm, which lies between the desert and the sea, are two images of the god Ammonon, a bronze image facing an iron image, across the fires and bloodstains of the altar stone. When the gory sunset of the day of sacrifice is over, and the writhing fires of the sacrifice are dead, and the moon smiles with a cold and marble smile on the blackened altar, then Ammonon speaks to Ammonon with a voice of iron and a voice of bronze. Thus, and not otherwise, the image of iron speaks to the image of bronze. Brother, when the censers, which are wrought of single sapphires and rubies, had turned the air to a blue mist of perfume, and the red serpents of the fire were fed on the heart of the sacrifice, I dreamed a strange dream. Methought, in some far day, a day as yet unprophesied of the stars, the temple and the city of Morm, the people thereof, and we, the images of its god, were one with the sand of the desert and the sand of the sea. Stone was fallen from stone, atom parted from atom, in the corruption of rain, and wind and sun. Lichens and the desert grass had eaten the temple to its plinth, and the cold, slow fire of rust and verdigris, crawling from mouth to nostrils, from knees to throat, had left of us twain a little pile of red and green dust. The roots of a cactus clove the altar stone, and the shadows of the cactus, like the uncouth finger of some fantastic dial, crawled thereon through days of blue fire and nights of sultry sulphurous moonlight. Blown through the lonely marketplace, the wind of the desert offered the dust of kings to the wind of the sea. Clark Ashton Smith. On to poems now. This is one called Nero. Just a couple of lines from it, of course. This is to give an idea of the grandeur of Cass, really, and the words it uses are so powerful. What rapture it would be if but to watch destruction crouching at the back of time, the tongueless dooms which dog the travelling suns, the vampire silence at the breast of worlds, fire without light that gnaws the base of things, and leaf's mounting tide that rots the stone of fundamental spheres. This were enough till such a time as the dazzled wings of will came up with power's accession, scarcely felt for very suddenness. Then I would urge the strong contention and conflicting might of chaos and creation, matching them, those immemorial powers inimical, and all their stars and gulfs subservient, dynasts of time and anarchs of the dark, in closer wars reverseless, and would set new discord at the universal core, a Samson principle to bring it down in one magnificence of ruin. Yea, the monster chaos were mine unleashed hound, and all my destruction's own right arm. I would exult to mark the smouldering fires, renew beneath my breath their elder fire, and feed upon themselves to nothingness. I really am struggling to find ones not to, just to read out. I've just turned to a random page. I'll read The Desire of Vastness. Supreme with night, what high mysteriarch, the undreamt of God beyond the trinal noon of elder suns imperial. Past the moon, circling some wild world outmost in the dark, lays on me this unfathomed wish to hark what central sea with plume-plucked midnight strewn, plangent to what enormous plenilune that lifts in silence hinderless and stark. The brazen empire of the bournless waste, the unstayed dominions of the brazen sky, these I desire, and all things wide and deep, and, lifted past the level years, would taste the cup of an Olympian ecstasy, titanic dream, and cyclopean sleep. Memnon at midnight. Methought upon the tomb-encumbered shore I stood off Egypt's lone monarchal stream, and saw immortal Memnon throned supreme in gloom as of that Memphian night of yore. Fold upon fold purpureal he wore, beneath the star-born canopy extreme, carven of silence and colossal dream, where waters flowed like sleep for evermore. Lo, in the darkness thick with dust of years, how many a ghostly god around his throne, with thronging wings that were forgotten fames, stood ere the dawn restored to ancient ears the long withholden thunder of their names, and music stilled to monumental stone. I'll end with the Hashish Eater, or the Apocalypse of Evil, which is Cass's longest poem. Bow down, I am the Emperor of Dreams. I crown me with the million-coloured sun of secret worlds incredible, and take their trailing skies for vestment when I soar, throned on the mounting zenith, and illume the spaceward flown horizon infinite. Like rampant monsters roaring for their glut, the fiery crested oceans rise and rise, by jealous moons, maleficently urged to follow me forever. Mountains horned with peaks of sharpest adamant, and mawed with sulphur-lit volcanoes lava-langed, usurp the skies with thunder, but in vain, and continents of serpent-shapen trees, with slimy trunks that lengthen league by league, pursue my flight through ages spurned to fire by that supreme ascendance, sorcerers and evil kings predominantly armed with scrolls of fulvous dragon skin, whereon are worm-like runes of ever-twisting flame, would stay me. And the sirens of the stars with foam-like songs from silver fragrance wrought would lure me to their crystal reefs, and moons where vaporized senescent devils dwell, with antic gnomes abominably wise, heave up their icy horns across my way. Those are the first couple of lines of an incredible poem. With scrolls of fulvous dragon skin, whereon are worm-like runes of ever-twisting flame. I'm almost tempted just to leave it there and not even sum up, really. Read this book if you're a fan of fantastical imagery. I probably will be doing a reading, actually. I may start a second series, second book series, where I read passages or whole works from authors. And this, Clark Ashton Smith, The Dark Eidolon and Other Fantasies may be my first in the series. Read this book, it's absolutely incredible. Thank you for watching.